Welcome back to Deep Domain, the channel that dives past the crushed depth of history to find the stories of the silent service, the unseen battles, and the forgotten heroes who changed the world from the darkness. The submarine is the ultimate predator, a ghost of steel and shadows. But its primary weapon, the torpedo, is a weapon of brutal, unforgiving mathematics. A straight runner. The classic tin fish of the Second World War is a dumb weapon. It goes only where it's pointed. Firing one is a complex art of range, bearing, target speed, and gyro angle. A single miscalculation, a slight jink by the target, and the $10,000 weapon swims harmlessly into the empty black ocean, its launch a betrayal that screams your position to every enemy destroyer in the area. But what if the torpedo wasn't dumb? What if it had a mind? What if it could listen, think, and hunt? This was the dream of a handful of engineers, a concept so advanced, so complex, it was considered science fiction. And it was the obsession of one man, a man his superiors considered brilliant, but difficult. A man they called mad. He was a lieutenant, a submariner, a man haunted by the failures he had seen firsthand, and he proposed a torpedo that could hear its target and hunt it down. His idea was rejected, ridiculed, and forbidden. So he built it anyway, in secret, with scavenged parts and a crazy idea that defied all known doctrine. This is the mad submariner who built a torpedo that hunted its own targets. Before we flood the tubes, if you believe that the most powerful weapon in any arsenal is the stubborn, innovative human mind, then I need you to join our crew. First, hit that subscribe button and make sure you ring the notification bell. It's your clearance for all our future patrols. Second, hit that like button. It tells the algorithms that these deep dive stories are what you want to see. And finally, drop a comment down below. Let us know what country and city you're hailing from. Our global flotilla is our greatest strength. All right, rig for dive. Let's take her down. His name was Lieutenant Elias Vance, and in 1942 he was a man drowning in failure, though he had never lost a ship. He was a junior officer, an engineer with a brilliant, uncomfortably intense mind, assigned not to a sleek, frontline Gatto-class submarine, but to the bureaucratic, landlocked purgatory of the Naval Torpedo Station in Newport, Rhode Island. This was not a reward. It was an exile. Vance, just 6 months prior, had been the torpedo officer on the USS S-38, one of the ancient creaking S-boats tasked with the impossible defense of the Philippines. He had been there. He had lived the nightmare that was the Mark 14 torpedo. He had watched, his eye pressed to the periscope as his captain, a brilliant, aggressive man, had achieved a perfect textbook setup on a Japanese cruiser. He had heard the whoosh of the torpedoes leaving the tubes. He had counted the seconds, and he had heard nothing. No boom, no explosion, just the agonizing silence of failure, followed by the terrifying, high-pitched ping, ping, ping of the counter-attacking Japanese destroyers. His torpedoes, the most expensive and complex weapons in the U.S. arsenal, had failed. They had run too deep, their magnetic detonators had failed, and their contact detonators, he would later learn, were so poorly designed they often broke on impact before they could trigger the warhead. Vance had returned to Pearl Harbor and then to Newport, not as a hero, but as a technical witness, a man carrying a gospel of inconvenient, infuriating truth. He wrote reports, detailed, scathing, meticulous reports, filled with the mathematics of why the Mark 14 was a catastrophic failure, and the Bureau of Ordnance, BUORD, the powerful, insulated, almost religious organization responsible for the torpedo, hated him for it. BUORD, led by admirals who had built their careers on this weapon, refused to believe their calculations were wrong. The failures, they insisted, were the crews. The captains were firing from too far out. The torpedo men were miscalibrating the depth. The lieutenants, like Vance, were simply panicking and seeing things. In their view, Vance wasn't an astute engineer. He was a failed, hysterical officer, looking for an excuse. So, they had exiled him to Newport, the very place the Mark 14 was built, ostensibly to liaise with the engineers on improvements. In reality, it was to shut him up, to bury him in paperwork, to let him see firsthand the genius of the men he was questioning. He was assigned to a cramped, windowless office under the command of Captain Marcus Shaw, a hard-nosed, by-the-book traditionalist who had personally overseen the Mark 14's development and viewed Vance's presence as a personal insult. "Lieutenant," Shaw had boomed at him on his first day, his massive bulldog face a mask of cold fury, "your battlefield observations are noted. They are also wrong. They are the panicked, unreliable anecdotes of a junior officer under stress. Our torpedoes work. The problem is training. Your job here is not to innovate. Your job is to learn. You will review the detonator schematics, you will reread the doctrine, and you will write a report concurring with our findings that the failures are due to improper field maintenance and poor tactical deployment. Are we clear?" Vance, quiet, intense, with eyes that seemed to be looking at a problem 5 years in the future, just stood there. "Sir," he said, his voice soft, "the problem isn't just the detonator, it's the concept. We're firing dumb steel fish. We're wasting thousands of man-hours and millions of dollars on a weapon that has maybe a 10% chance of success, if the detonator works. A weapon that, when it misses, betrays the submarine's position for free. It's inefficient." Shaw's face darkened. "Inefficient? Son, it is the only weapon we have. What's your efficient alternative? Hand-delivering the damn warhead?" "No, sir," Vance said, his own passion, the thing he tried so hard to suppress, breaking through. "We make the torpedo hunt. We make it listen." He pointed to his head. "My specialty, sir, at Caltech, was hydroacoustics. The sound of the ocean. Every ship, every propeller, makes a unique, identifiable sound. The thump, thump, thump of a merchant's screws. The high-pitched whine of a destroyer's turbines. It's a beacon. What if we put ears on the torpedo? A simple, passive acoustic sensor. 4 small hydrophones. We wire them to a simple analog comparator. The torpedo doesn't just run straight, it runs towards the loudest sound. It wouldn't need a perfect captain solution. It would just need to get close. The torpedo would do the rest. It would hunt the target down." The silence in Shaw's office was total. Shaw just stared at him, his mouth slightly open, as if Vance had just started speaking in tongues. Then he let out a single, sharp, barking laugh. "Acoustics? You want to put ears on a tin fish? Son, are you a complete blithering idiot?" He stood up, his massive frame towering over Vance. "Do you have any idea the noise a torpedo's own propellers make? It would be deafened. It would be hunting itself. And what if the loudest sound isn't the target? What if it's our own submarine? What if it's the escort destroyer, not the tanker we're aiming for? You want to build a torpedo that circles back and sinks the sub that fired it? It's madness. It's the ramblings of an eccentric, as the Admiral put it. The ramblings of an eccentric." Vance's own words, from his own ignored 1938 proposal thrown back in his face. He had, in fact, proposed this very idea years ago, and it had been dismissed as fantasy. Now, it was being dismissed as the ravings of a mad, panicked officer. "Sir," Vance tried, "the frequency filtering, we could tune it, to only listen for the low-frequency thump of a merchant ship's screws, to ignore the high pitch of destroyers and our own electric motors." "You will do nothing of the sort," Shaw roared, slamming his fist on his desk. "Your mad idea is officially, personally, rejected. You are a torpedo officer, not a scientist. Your job is to focus on the Mark 14 contact exploder. That is your only mission. You will not work on this acoustic homing fantasy. You will not scavenge parts. You will not run simulations. If I so much as hear the word hydrophone from you again, I will have you personally transferred to the most godforsaken, ice-locked weather station in the Aleutians. Am I clear?" "Yes, sir," Vance whispered, the defeat a bitter metallic taste in his mouth. Crystal. He was dismissed, humiliated. He walked out of Shaw's office, the by-the-book engineers and technicians in the outer office pointedly avoiding his gaze, some of them smirking. "Mad Eli," he heard one of them mutter just loud enough, "thinks he can build a torpedo that hears." Vance walked, not back to his assigned office, but to the one place on the base he felt sane. The audio lab. a small soundproofed room where they analyzed the acoustic signatures of their own torpedo motors. He locked the door. He sat in the dark, surrounded by reel-to-reel tape machines. He put on a pair of heavy headphones and hit play on a recording. It wasn't a torpedo. It was a recording he'd made himself on the S-38. It was the sound, the deep, powerful thump-thump-thump of a Japanese Maru's screws, a sound he had recorded just moments before he'd fired his own, useless, deep-running Mark 14s. It was the sound of his failure. It was the sound of his obsession. Shaw was wrong. The admirals were wrong. The sound was the key, and if they wouldn't let him build it, he would do it anyway. His career was already over. He had nothing left to lose. He would build his mad idea in secret, in the dark. He would build the Hound, and he would prove them all wrong. My new office was a place that didn't officially exist. It was a cold, damp, forgotten calibration shed at the extreme northern edge of the Newport torpedo range, designated only as Shed 14. It smelled of sea salt, rust, and the ghosts of failed experiments from a decade prior. Its only window was a grime-caked wire mesh-reinforced square that looked out over the gray, churning waters of Narragansett Bay. My co-conspirator, the man who had given me the key, was Chief Petty Officer Salty Kowalski, the grizzled, cynical, pre-war overlord of the boneyard, the sprawling, muddy field where dead torpedoes were sent to be cannibalized. Kowalski was a man who had seen too many Boer geniuses come and go, a man who believed in physical results, not slide rule prophecies. He despised Captain Shaw and the entire front office bureaucracy. When I had gone to him, not as an officer, but as a fellow, frustrated mechanic, and told him I needed to run a private test to figure out why the Mark 14 was a piece of junk, he hadn't asked questions. He'd just spit a stream of tobacco juice, fished a key from his greasy pocket, and grunted, "Shed 14. Power's still live. Don't burn it down." And I was never here. He was my only ally, and his plausible deniability was my only shield. My lab was established. Now I needed the parts. This was my crazy wire trick in the making. I became a ghost, a scavenger in my own boneyard. My first acquisition was the body. I couldn't use a live 1,000 pound, Torpex-filled Mark 14. I needed a testbed. Kowalski lost the paperwork for a Mark 14 Mod 3 test slug, a bluehead dummy torpedo, identical in size, weight, and hydrodynamic properties, but completely inert, designed for depth keeping and motor tests. It was my blank canvas. I spent a week in Shed 14, gutting it, ripping out the complex, pristine, useless gyro controls and depth mechanisms, leaving only a hollow, 21-inch diameter, 21-foot-long steel tube. Next, I needed ears. Captain Shaw's mockery had been a clue. "Do you have any idea the noise a torpedo's own propellers make?" He was right. The steam turbine propellers of a Mark 14 screamed underwater, a high-frequency shriek that would deafen any conventional hydrophone. It would be hunting itself. But I wasn't interested in the scream. I was interested in the thump. My audio recordings from the S-38 were my holy script. I had spent hours in the audio lab analyzing them. The Japanese Maru, its massive, slow-turning merchant screws, created a sound signature that was completely different. It was a low, powerful, rhythmic thump-thump-thump, a bass note in the 100 to 200 hertz range. The destroyer's high-speed turbines, conversely, were a high-pitched whine up in the 300 to 500 hertz range. And our own torpedo motors, even higher. The problem wasn't volume, it was frequency. I didn't need a microphone. I needed a filter. I needed a brain that was electronically deaf to everything except the bass beat of a cargo ship. I found my ears in the scrap pile behind the sonar lab. They were pulling apart a damaged, obsolete, passive hydrophone array from a wrecked Fletcher-class destroyer. The housing was shattered, but 4 of the crystal hydrophone elements were miraculously intact. I liberated them, smuggling them into Shed 14, my pockets heavy with the future. Now, the brain. This was the true madness, the part Shaw couldn't comprehend. It was 1942. There were no microchips, no digital processors. The brain had to be analog. It had to be built by hand, from vacuum tubes, resistors, capacitors, and wire. A lot of wire. I became a creature of the night, working from midnight until 400, fueled by black coffee and a cold, burning fury. I spent 2 weeks building my crazy wire trick. I mounted the 4 hydrophones in the nose cone of the bluehead slug, set in a diamond pattern, encased in castor oil for acoustic conductivity. Then, the brain. I built a series of analog amplifiers, one for each hydrophone, using vacuum tubes I'd cannibalized from a scrapped radar set. But the key, the absolute heart of my hound, was the filter network. I built a set of brutal, multi-stage, low-pass filters. These were complex circuits of inductors and capacitors, hand-tuned, hand-soldered, designed to do one thing: kill all high frequencies. My Torpedo's brain was electronically deaf to anything above 400 hertz. It could not hear its own motor. It could not hear the high-pitched scream of a warship. It could only hear the low, 150 hertz thump of a fleeing merchantman. But how to steer? I didn't need a gyro. I needed a comparator. I built a simple, elegant, analog logic circuit. If the 150 hertz signal was louder, in the port hydrophones, it sent a small, positive voltage to a salvaged Bendix actuator I'd linked to the Torpedo's port rudder. If it was louder in the starboard hydrophones, it sent a voltage to the starboard rudder. It was a simple, dumb, bang-bang control system. It wasn't proportional. It wasn't smart. It was a moth, mindlessly, relentlessly, flying towards the loudest low-frequency sound it could hear. It was a bloodhound, trained to one scent. And what about Shaw's other point? The fear of it turning around and sinking us? That was the easy part. I was a torpedo man. I understood the weapon. I salvaged 2 key components from a condemned Mark VI exploder mechanism, a simple clockwork timer, and a hydrostatic pressure switch. I wired them in series with the brain's main power supply. The hound would be deaf, dumb, and blind when it left the tube. It would run straight, just like a normal fish, for the first 60 seconds, giving it time to clear the launching submarine. Only after that 60 seconds had passed, and the hydrostatic switch confirmed it was deeper than 50 feet, would the power finally flow to the amplifiers. Only then would the hound wake up and begin its hunt. It was a Rube Goldberg contraption of salvaged parts, glowing vacuum tubes, and a spider's nest of soldered wires, all crammed into the gutted casing of a practice torpedo. It was the ugliest, most illegal thing I had ever built, and it was beautiful now. The test. I couldn't launch it, not yet. I had to know if the brain worked. I was back in my sanctuary, the audio lab, at Eero 200. I had the brain, the chassis of amplifiers and filters, on the workbench. I had it hooked up to an oscilloscope, and I was feeding in my precious recordings. First, I played the tape of the S-38's own electric motors. The oscilloscope needle for the brain's output stayed dead flat. The filters were working. It was deaf. Then, the tape of the Japanese destroyer S-turbines. Again, nothing. The needle didn't even twitch. My heart was hammering. Then, I put on the tape. The tape. The recording of the heavy, booming, 150 hertz screws of the Maru. Thump, thump, thump. The sound filled the headphones, and the needle on the oscilloscope slammed into the red. It jumped with every beat. It was hearing it. It was locking on. A low, triumphant laugh escaped my lips. I had done it. I had built the hound. A little late to be listening to music, Lieutenant. The voice was ice. It cut through my triumph like a knife. I spun around. Captain Marcus Shaw was standing in the doorway, his arms crossed, his face a mask of cold, furious suspicion. He had been making a late-night inspection, drawn by the one light he hadn't expected to see on, His eyes weren't on the tape player. They were on my workbench, on the glowing vacuum tubes, on the spider's nest of wires, on the oscilloscope, its needle still twitching in time with the thump, thump, thump. The sound of the enemy. What? In God's name? Is that Vance? He hissed. I thought I made myself clear. I thought I told you to drop this. Acoustic fantasy. I was caught. My career, my life, it was over. Aleutians, here I come. But my brain, fueled by adrenaline and a sudden, desperate cunning, latched onto his own words. The flaw in the crew, not the weapon. It is a failure analysis rig, sir, I said, my voice shockingly calm, my heart trying to escape my chest. You were right, sir. The problem is the crew. I'm testing the Mark 6 contact exploder, the one that's failing to detonate. Shaw looked confused. What does that mess of wires have to do with a contact exploder? It's a firing pin, Lieutenant. It hits, it fires. No, sir. I lied. The lie so beautiful, so perfect, it felt like truth. That's what Buord thinks, but I believe. The problem is acoustics, the specific resonant frequency of a target's screws, like this one. I tapped the tape player. Is creating a sympathetic vibration, a micro-vibration, that's fracturing the firing pin before it even hits the target. It's work hardening, sir. It's acoustic embrittlement. This mess of wires is just an amplifier and a filter to see if I can isolate the resonant frequency that's causing the failure. It was the most brilliant, glorious, technical bullshit I had ever produced in my life. It was just plausible enough, just scientific enough, to work. Shaw stared at the twitching needle. He didn't understand electronics, not at this level. He just understood failure. And I had just given him a new, complex, and conveniently unprovable scapegoat. Acoustic embrittlement, he repeated, testing the words. He actually looked intrigued. That's a very unorthodox theory, Lieutenant. It's an unorthodox problem, sir, I said, pressing my advantage. Well, find it then, he snapped, his confidence returning, and write a report that confirms the Mark 14 is sound, and that this noise is the problem. Good work, Vance. Carry on. He turned and walked out of the lab. I leaned against the workbench, my legs like water, my body drenched in a cold sweat. I had survived. My lie, my crazy wire trick, had saved me. And in doing so, it had just given me the perfect cover to move to Phase 2. Kowalski and I, we were going to take the Hound for a swim. The lie I fed Captain Shaw was a masterpiece of desperation, and it worked with a success that was almost as terrifying as my secret experiment. Shaw, a man who believed in the infallibility of Buord's engineering, wanted to believe that the Mark 14's failures were not due to his own department's faulty designs, but to some obscure, external, unavoidable physical phenomenon. Acoustic embrittlement. It sounded complex, it sounded scientific, and it had the beautiful bureaucratic advantage of being almost impossible to disprove. He didn't just approve my continued research, he championed it. He gave me priority access to the audio lab, a small budget for specialized testing equipment, vacuum tubes, capacitors, and wire, and most importantly, he shielded me from the mundane duties of the torpedo station. I was now Mad Eli, but in a different way. I was the eccentric genius in the back room, working on a bizarre, high-level physics problem that was, in Shaw's mind, the key to vindicating the Mark 14. My exile had become the perfect cover. I was a spy, a rogue agent, operating with the full blessing of the very man I was deceiving. Salty Kowalski, my cynical, grizzled co-conspirator, found the whole situation hilarious. He'd lean against the damp-stained wall of Shed 14, chewing his tobacco, watching me meticulously solder another vacuum tube amplifier into the guts of the Bluehead test slug. "I gotta hand it to you, Lieutenant," he'd grumble, spitting a stream of brown juice onto the concrete floor. You spun him a yarn so thick he's knitting a goddamn sweater with it. Acoustic embrittlement. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. The man'll believe anything except the truth staring him in the face. But Kowalski's skepticism was purely for show. His help was total. He was the master of the midnight requisition. He saw my design, my spider's nest of glowing tubes and scavenged hydrophones, not as madness, but as the ultimate up yours to the front office brass he despised. He lost the logs for the destroyer's sonar components. He found a crate of high-capacity silver-zinc batteries, the kind reserved for experimental electric motor tests, batteries that could power my power-hungry vacuum tube brain for far longer than the standard lead-acid ones. He even machined a new watertight, pressure-resistant nose cone for the test slug, one with 4 perfectly milled sound-transparent windows for my hydrophones, logging the entire job as repairing a damaged water pump impeller. The work itself was agonizing, delicate, and performed in a constant state of cold, paranoid fear. Shed 14 was our secret, unheated cathedral, our world lit by a single bare dangling bulb. The smell of hot solder and castor oil mixing with the salty, frozen mud smell of the bay. My brain was a monster of 1940s technology. It was huge. A rack of 16 glowing vacuum tubes, each one a fragile glass and metal miracle, hand-wired into a complex, multi-stage analog computer. There were the amplifiers. The crucial low-pass filters, designed to make the Torpedo deaf to everything but the 100-200 Hz thump of a merchant screw. The analog comparator circuit that would send the steer left or steer right signals. And finally, my fail-safes. The 60-second clockwork arming timer and the hydrostatic pressure switch. I had to shock mount this entire, fragile, glass audiophile's nightmare inside the 21-inch diameter steel tube to withstand the violence of a torpedo launch, a 40-knot run through turbulent water, and the bone-jarring impact of a hit. Kowalski, using his brute force genius, salvaged the heavy-duty rubber engine mounts from a wrecked PT boat, and we built a custom, suspended cradle for the brain, letting it float in the center of the torpedo body, a delicate spider in a steel web. While I worked on the brain, I wrote my official reports for Captain Shaw, filled with absolute nonsense, charts of resonant frequencies, photos of microfractures in firing pins that I had created myself with a tuning fork and a small hammer. Shaw loved them. He forwarded them to Buord as in proof that the problem was external, a new German acoustic weapon, perhaps. My lie was not only protecting me, it was growing, taking on a bureaucratic life of its own. After a month of sleepless nights and close calls, like the time a shore patrol nearly discovered our lit shed at 300, forcing us to douse the lights and hide in an empty oil drum for an hour, listening to their boots crunching in the snow just outside, the Hound was ready. The Bluehead test slug was sealed, its glowing brain ticking away silently inside, unpowered by Kowalski's stolen batteries. It was a 300-pound, 21-foot-long gamble. My bench tests were conclusive, but the ocean was the real test. I needed to launch it. I needed a target. I went back to Captain Shaw. "Sir," I said, my face a mask of focused, scientific concern, "I believe I have isolated the critical resonant frequency that's causing the embrittlement. But my bench tests are inconclusive. The vibration of the torpedo's own motor, it interferes with the reading. I need a live run, sir. I need to launch the test slug with a new, instrumented firing pin to see if it survives the run." Shaw, hooked on my lie, bought it instantly. A live run? Excellent, Vance. Yes, we must have empirical data. He authorized it, a night test, when the range was clear, to avoid disrupting the Mark 14 training schedule. He authorized the use of the range master, a decrepit, self-propelled test barge, and a skeleton crew, which would, of course, be Kowalski and 2 of his most trusted and most implicated torpedo men. "And, sir," I added, my heart hammering, "to properly simulate the target acoustic field, I'll need a noise source. Perhaps the remote-controlled target skiff. the one the gunnery range uses. Its engine is a low-frequency thumper. It would be a perfect simulation of a merchant ship's acoustic pressure. Brilliant, Vance, Shaw boomed, his face beaming. He was so close to proving his torpedoes were perfect. He could taste it. Yes, requisition it. Get the data. Get the proof. The night of the test was pitch black, a cold, moonless January night. The waters of the bay choppy, black as ink. It was 0300. We were a mile off the coast, on the creaking, rusting Rangemaster, the barge pitching in the swell. The wind was a low, mournful howl. It was terrifying. The Hound, our blue slug, sat in the launch cradle on the deck, a dark, menacing shape. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely connect the final arming wires. "This is it, Lieutenant," Kowalski muttered, his face a shadow under his watch cap. "Your whole goddamn career, right here. You ready to be a hero, or the biggest joke in the Atlantic Fleet?" I didn't answer. I just nodded. "Radio check to the skiff," I said, my voice a dry croak. Kowalski spoke into the handset. A mile away, in the darkness, a single, dim light flashed twice. Then, we heard it, faintly, on the wind. A slow, rhythmic, thump, thump, thump. The target skiff's engine, a noisy single-cylinder diesel, had started. It was our Maru. It began to move, chugging slowly across the test range, a single, dim light on its mast. "Target is underway," Kowalski reported. "Range, 2,000 yards. Bearing, 045. I took a deep breath. This was it. The moment of truth. "Flood the tube," I said, my voice sounding like it was coming from someone else. "Stand by to launch." Launch. There was a deafening roar of compressed air, a hiss that momentarily drowned out the wind. A massive splash. And the Hound was in the water. For a second, nothing. Then, a white, phosphorescent wake appeared, streaking away into the darkness, its electric motors whining faintly. It was running straight, perfectly straight and dumb. My 60-second timer. I stood at the railing, my stopwatch in my shaking hand, counting the seconds, my eyes glued to that fading white line. 10, 20, 30. The wake was still straight. The skiff was chugging along, oblivious. 40, 50. "It's a dud, Lieutenant," Kowalski muttered, disappointment and relief warring in his voice. "She's just a straight runner. Your brain is dead." 58, 59, 60. At that exact instant, as if a giant, invisible hand had reached into the bay and grabbed it, the white wake of the torpedo stopped going straight. It made a sharp, violent, unnatural turn, a hard 40-degree jink to port, kicking up a huge splash of white water. It had woken up. It had heard the thumping, and it was now pointing directly, perfectly, at the dim light of the target skiff, a mile away. "My God," I whispered. Kowalski grabbed the radio. "Target skiff! Target skiff! Evasive maneuvers! Evasive now! He's hot! He's hot!" The dim light of the skiff suddenly began to zigzag wildly across the water, the operator, in a panic, trying to escape, but it was no use. The Hound wasn't aiming where the skiff was. It was aiming where the sound was. We watched, mesmerized, as the white wake corrected. It didn't follow the zigzag. It cut the corner. It was a predator, a wolf, taking the shortest path to its prey. It was horrifying. It was beautiful. He's gonna hit it," Kowalski breathed, his voice full of awe. "That crazy son of a bitch is actually gonna hit it." The two white lines converged. The white wake of the torpedo and the white wake of the fleeing skiff. They met. And then, crunch. It was not a warhead explosion. It was the sound of 3,000 pounds of solid steel, traveling at 40 knots, colliding with a 30-foot wooden boat. A catastrophic, splintering, shattering of wood, metal, and engine parts. The skiff disappeared in a cloud of spray and debris. Its dim light vanished. The thumping engine was silenced. The Hound, its motor expended, its mission complete, sank into the black, cold water of the bay. Silence. Just the howl of the wind and the creaking of the barge. Vance and Kowalski just stood there, in the dark, their mouths open, staring at the spot where the skiff had been. It had worked. It had hunted. It had killed. It was the first successful acoustic homing torpedo run in American history. Katie Kowalski finally broke the silence, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Well, Lieutenant, your acoustic embrittlement test. It appears the firing pin was a complete success." He looked at Vance, his eyes wide in the darkness. "And you owe the United States Navy one target skiff. How in the holy hell are we going to explain this in the report?" The official report for the destruction of target skiff T-188 was a masterpiece of technical obfuscation, and I, Lieutenant Elias Vance, wrote every single glorious, perjurious word of it. I sat in the gray, sterile quiet of the audio lab, the very room where Captain Shaw had almost discovered my secret, and I composed my lie. The Hound, my beautiful revolutionary hunting torpedo, did not exist. Instead, I described the test of a simple instrumented firing pin, a component that didn't exist, designed to test my acoustic embrittlement theory, a theory that was pure inspired bullshit. The report was dry, dense with numbers, and utterly convincing. Test objective, I wrote, to verify acoustic embrittlement of the Mark VI firing pin when subjected to a 150 Hz harmonic pressure field, simulating enemy merchant vessel propellers at 40 knots. I described in meticulous, agonizing detail how we launched the inert test slug. I described its flawless straight run, and then the climax. Upon the test vehicle's timer activation, simulating arming distance, the Hound, our internal code name for the test instrument, sir, a small joke, began its programmed acoustic data acquisition. I described how, upon closing with the target skiff, the instrumented pin monitor showed a catastrophic vibration spike, confirming the embrittlement theory, and the collision, the destruction of the skiff. Regrettably, I wrote, the test vehicle's guidance system failed post-acquisition, likely due to the same harmonic vibration, resulting in an unfortunate but conclusive collision with the target drone. The drone is a total loss. However, the data is unequivocal. The Mark VI firing pin is vulnerable to acoustic resonance. I submitted the report to Captain Shaw. His reaction was not anger at the loss of the skiff. It was triumph, a deep, booming, vindicated joy. I had done it. I had proven what he had known all along. His beloved Mark XIV torpedo was perfect. It was the enemy's fault it was failing. This, acoustic embrittlement, this newly discovered phenomenon, was the culprit. He called a high-priority meeting with the heads of Buord. He didn't just invite me. He paraded me. I was Mad Eli no more. I was Lieutenant Vance, the man who solved it. I stood in that suffocating, cigar smoke-filled conference room, the same room where my ideas had been mocked, and I was hailed as a genius. "Gentlemen," Shaw boomed, slapping my report on the polished mahogany table, "Lieutenant Vance, through his unorthodox but brilliant research, has found the problem. It is not our exploder. It is not our depth-keeping. It is the damned Japs' engines. Their propeller noise is shattering our firing pins before they can even impact." It was the most beautiful, insane lie I had ever heard. And they bought it. Hook, line, and sinker. Why? Because it was the lie they needed. It was the one solution that didn't involve admitting that their own multi-million-dollar program was a catastrophic failure. "So, Lieutenant," an admiral from Washington finally asked, his eyes narrowed, "you've found the disease. Now, what's the cure?" This was the moment. The checkmate. I was trapped. I had to continue the lie. I had to provide a fix for a problem that didn't exist, a fix that was, in reality, My secret hidden revolution. "Sir," I said, my voice a mask of humble calculation, "the contact firing pin is compromised. We can't rely on it. So, we must bypass it." I stepped to the blackboard. My hands were not shaking. I was no longer a madman. I was a savior. "The problem, sir, is the sound. But the sound is also the solution." I began to draw a schematic, a simple, elegant circuit diagram. The Mark 14 already has a magnetic detonator, which is unreliable. But what if we added a tertiary detonator, a new kind of proximity fuse, an acoustic proximity fuse? I drew my ears, a simple hydrophone. I drew my brain, a vacuum tube amplifier and a filter circuit. The enemy merchant ship has a unique 150 Hz acoustic signature, loud and low. Our torpedoes and our submarines are high frequency. Destroyers are high frequency. We can build a simple, passive filter, a circuit that is deaf to everything except that 150 Hz thump. When the torpedo gets close, say within 20 yards, as the amplitude of that signal will be overwhelming. We can use that peak signal to trigger a relay. That relay fires the warhead. Boom. I stepped back. I had just described the hound's ears and its brain, but I had described them only as a detonator, a fuse. I had said nothing, absolutely nothing, about the rudders. I had hidden the fact that the torpedo could hunt inside the lie that it could just hear. Captain Shaw was beaming. "My God, Vance. It's brilliant. It bypasses the embrittlement problem entirely. It uses the enemy's own weapon against him. It's perfect." The admirals were nodding. This was a fix. This was a modification kit. This wasn't a new torpedo. This was something they could build fast, implement in the field, and, most importantly, it was a secret weapon that Buord could take full credit for. "Captain Shaw," the admiral said, "I am authorizing this. Project is Priority Alpha. I want 1,000 of these. Acoustic detonator kits in the Pacific. Yesterday. Lieutenant Vance, you are no longer an analyst. You are now the head of the Mark 24 fuse program. Get it done." My lie had become a billion-dollar defense contract. The next 6 months were a blur of controlled, conspiratorial madness. Salty Kowalski was promoted to my chief, and Shed 14 became the most secret, most high-priority facility in Newport. We were a skunk works, hidden inside a lie. We had a blank check, and we had 2 sets of blueprints. There was the official design, the one for the inspectors and the Buord engineers, which showed a simple passive acoustic filter wired to a detonator relay. Then, there was the real design, the one that only me, Kowalski, and our 2 hand-picked, silent as the grave technicians ever saw. The one where the comparator circuit didn't just go to the detonator, but also had 2 other outputs, 2 little wires, labeled rudder actuator port and rudder actuator starboard. We were building the Hound in plain sight and disguising it as a hearing aid. The extra vacuum tubes. Section 7 of the report, additional amplification stages for deep water signal acquisition. The complex actuator relays. Section 9. Gyro stabilization interface to prevent fuse from pre-arming during course changes. We buried the revolution in a mountain of bureaucratic, technical jargon so dense, so boring, that no admiral would ever read it. They just saw the cover sheet, acoustic fuse upgrade, and they signed. By late 1943, the Pacific Fleet was in crisis. The Mark 14 was still failing. Submarine captains were on the verge of mutiny. Admiral Lockwood, Comsopipak, was screaming at Washington for a solution, any solution, and Washington sent him. My lie. A crate of the first 100 production models of the Mark 24 fuse kit was flown to Pearl Harbor and loaded onto the fleet's most aggressive and most desperate submarines. Among them, the USS Tang, under the command of a young, hyper-aggressive skipper named Richard O'Kane. The report came back on January 17, 1944. It was classified top secret, but Shaw, in his pride, read it aloud to me. O'Kane had found a convoy. He had fired a spread of standard Mark 14s. He had heard. Nothing. Misses. Just like I had. The Japanese destroyer escort was turning, hunting him, its sonar pinging. O'Kane was cornered, diving deep, one last chance. He fired his 2 stern tubes, both loaded with our acoustic fuse. He had no solution. It was a down-the-throat, 1 in a million parting shot. He fired and dived. The sonar man, listening, reported the torpedoes running. And then he started screaming. "Captain!" His voice crackled over the radio log. "The fish. They're turning. They're not following the gyro bearing. They're turning towards the Maru. They're hunting." Shaw looked at me, his face confused. Hunting? What does he mean, hunting? The fuse. I just kept my face a mask of stone. And then, the explosion. A massive, catastrophic detonation that was so loud, it momentarily deafened the Tang's sonar. Then, another. 2 hits. 2 kills. The target was gone. The destroyer, panicked, fled. O'Kane was a hero, and my lie. My fuse was the talk of the Pacific Fleet. It was the magic fish. The witch. The torpedo that couldn't miss. The Mark 24, which the crews, with their gallows humor, had re-nicknamed Fido, because it was a bloodhound, because it hunted. Shaw never understood. He went to his grave believing I had invented a brilliant detonator, and that the hunting reports were just the excited exaggerations of grateful captains. He never knew that his mad lieutenant, the man he'd exiled to Newport, had smuggled the entire future of naval warfare past him, hidden inside the lie he wanted to hear. I was the mad submariner, and my crazy wire trick, my hound, had just been given a blank check to go hunt. And it wouldn't stop. Until the war was over.